good to be here and in the midst of this conversation, which is, I struggle all the time with the ideas of art as a catalyst for transformation because it's the direction that my work has taken, but it's very complicated to see and have confidence in the results, even though I do it all the time. But so I'm always questioning, so it's good to hear other people talk about their work and what they're experiencing. What I'm going to do is I'm going to show basically a couple of little, projects that I've done outside of Project Row Houses. But beforehand, let me just say that Project Row Houses is the main focus of my work. I do engage in other projects in different places as a kind of, if I'm speaking in art terms, it's almost like, maybe the Project Row Houses are painting and these other projects are drawings. I use those other projects as ways to kind of understand how I'm practicing on Project Row Houses. So I'm going to go through and actually this presentation wasn't set up specifically for this event today, so there are a few slides from the beginning of some of the very early work that I was involved in that was all about kind of utilizing I was trained formally as a painter, and but trying to utilize that form as a way of being a platform for making discussions. So I was dealing strictly with political and social issues and organizing press conferences and rallies and that kind of stuff around these kind of big installation pieces. But as I started to kind of figure out, how to push beyond the boundaries of making work that was about issues or reflecting issues. In fact, it came up from a student, a high school student who was visiting my studio around 1990, who basically came in, he saw those big painting things that I was showing there, and he was complimenting me on it. But before he left, he said, well, Mr. Lowe, while your paintings and sculptures show what's going on in our communities, that's not what we need. We don't need people to tell us what the issues are. We know what they are. We live it every day. What we need is solutions. And he said, if you're an artist and you're creative, why can't you create some kind of solution? So that was the beginning point of me kind of thinking about, how do I create something how do I engage my practice in a way that's beyond just representational or just having being symbolic and poetic. And so I started Project Row Houses. But as I've said, during that time I've worked on a number of other projects, and this is one that I worked on with Suzanne Lacey and through Mary Jane Jacobs at the Spoleto Festival. And we did this project basically as a way of creating a conversation around an old housing project that had been torn down in the southern part of the Charleston Peninsula. And we just wanted to take the site where the houses were and create something that was symbolic of house and also symbolic of the kind of platform that the stoop represents for conversation. And so we built these 15 little outlines of where houses were in stoops and organized conversations that would happen in those on those stoops. Now, as it would be the day that the conversations were to happen, our original location got rained out, so we shifted into a covered area. But what was really important about that was the way that the conversations were organized and orchestrated around this issue of land and the use of land, in which oftentimes people don't necessarily speak to each other, people speak at each other from afar. And so this particular conversation, we carefully orchestrated how the conversation would happen and having a broad range of people at the table. And this was this was the starting table that we started with, and we said we wanted to kind of replicate this in the 15 conversations where you had, on the very left-hand side was a high school student, the next person in is the mayor of Charleston, the next person is a community activist, the man in the black suit is Congressman Clyburn, and a local businesswoman and a businessman here. And so the idea was to kind of have these wide range of conversations happening to kind of open the dialogue about what was going to happen with that property, because they were promised that it would be rebuilt as public housing, but of course after time passed they decided that they wanted to do upscale housing with a park. And so we kind of instigated this conversation, and but then as your question, Wendy's question about the sustainability of the project is always a questionable thing, because I feel like we weren't able to follow through with this project in a way that I'm accustomed to and I have a desire to. Then, and then the Delray Beach Cultural Loop project, I was invited to come in and work with a community group that was looking at trying to create some kind of understanding between the beachfront population and the indigenous population that had lived in Delray Beach for some time. And this one street, Swinton Street, in the middle is the dividing line. And the community was kind of stuck when they invited me, because what they decided, they wanted to have this kind of cultural exchange, but they didn't understand how they could have a cultural exchange, because they felt that the only cultural institutions were on the beachfront side, and they just kind of couldn't figure out what was the cultural contributions of the other side. And so what my process was to kind of go in and root out what those cultural contributions were and figure out how to communicate that and across the Swinton Avenue. So what we did was we found the churches were really, really vibrant, and there's a whole lot of history there, and then all the way down to just individual stories. So we set up this process that we could, this was a tour bus, but we wanted to have it so that this tour, as people went on this tour, it's about a 1.4 mile loop. And so people could go along this tour, you could walk it, and some people took the little trolleys, but throughout the tour, there were different we made these little totems with people that would put information about their lives, their families, what they do, what they thought about Delray Beach, and that kind of stuff. And what we did, though, we took people from the beachfront side, and they were in the indigenous population side, and vice versa. And so these were things that were throughout the neighborhood. But there were also other kind of projects that people were doing throughout the loop to kind of carry people through. But even artists were kind of doing these things on light poles where people within each household would kind of tell their stories, and the artists helped them kind of make these little plaques that would fit on the poles that could kind of also be a way of people that were going on the loop to kind of understand what was going on in their lives. And this was an artist who did a mobile domino table. But probably the highlight of this project for me, though, was because to me it's not so much about the creativity of what the artists bring to the project, but it's more about what the artists can do, or how a process can allow other people to see their own potential of creativity. And one of the things that we did there was people talked about this one tree, and they said if this tree could talk, it would tell us such wonderful stories. And we sat around and we talked about how we could make a talking tree, and we talked about all the electronic possibilities and all that stuff. And I was giving a presentation to a group of homeless people at a soup kitchen, and I just told them about some of the things we were trying to do, and I mentioned the talking tree. But without resources and time, we weren't able to do it. But on the day of the opening of the loop, people started asking me if I had seen, they were congratulating me on the success of the talking tree, which I didn't know anything about it. And then I went over, and it really blew me away that this group of homeless people had decided that they would make the talking tree. So they just went out to a construction site, got all these little blocks of wood, got twine and color markers and stuff, and they started the storytelling themselves. And so it was just kind of hanging there so people could go and kind of tell the stories, which was, it was really probably the most successful aspect of that, because it allowed, this process allows people to kind of find a way to engage themselves in this creative process. Now, but as I said, these were small projects that I was involved in that I do to kind of test and explore and nurture my own understanding of the work that I've been engaged in for the last 15, 16 years. But Project Row Houses came about, basically, as I said, the student challenged me and said, why don't you create something that, that changes the environment? And so, at that time, I kind of dropped the studio practice, and I've involved myself in this neighborhood called the Third Ward. And I did all kind of stuff with them, and I was invited to go on tours with them and do all kinds of things in the neighborhood. And one day they were doing a tour looking at the most dangerous places in the neighborhood and places that they want to have torn down. So we went all over the neighborhood, and they stopped at this one location, and they said this was the worst part because it was basically a block and a half with 22 of these little houses. And it was pretty close to a school, and there were churches around, and they just said it was the worst places. There's a lot of prostitution happening there, there's a lot of drug activity happening in this area, and the houses were used for all kinds of illegal activities. And while I agreed with them that it needed to be torn down, all of a sudden I started thinking about the possibilities of transforming this into a neighborhood. There was an artist named John Biggers that did lots of paintings about the beauty of these old shotgun house neighborhoods. And I started talking to him about what was significant about them, and he started telling me the history and all. And so that took me back to this site and said, why don't we make this a living John Biggers painting as a way of exploring the significance of these old traditional Southern type shotgun communities. And so once we started this process, it was a process of kind of figuring out how do you do it. At that point was when my practice became truly collaborative in a way that I had never thought of. But I had to deal with real estate people that knew about real estate, architects that knew about the architecture, history people, people that could develop programming, and so on and so forth. And but our first initial step, once we got the property, was to clean it up and start doing things with it that would draw attention to this place in a different way. So this was one of our first projects that we did. After we cleaned up the site, we just boarded up the windows because we were required by law. But we did these little paintings and little installations in the little porch areas and called it the drive-by exhibition, which at that time it got lots of attention because people were talking about drive-bys in the early 90s. It was all about drive-by shootings. But once we were able to clean the site and people start coming into the project, helping out people from the neighborhood, started out with just a few artists. We decided that we needed to go further and explore the cost of renovating these houses. Most of the people I talked to said that it was not worth it, that you should probably tear them down and start over. But there was something about the historic element of these houses in this location that it seemed worth trying to figure out how to build upon that. So we renovated the first house, and then we knew that the cost of renovating one of the houses was only about $5,000 with volunteer labor. And so then we went out and we challenged other institutions to come and take on a house. So we put together this thing called the House Challenge, where there were different institutions that were renovating each house. So that like the Museum of Fine Arts was renovating one, a local church was renovating another, some sorority groups were renovating houses. So it's like this whole process of people from different walks of life participating in the regeneration. But we knew, though, as we were working on the physical site, we started to look at, so what are the key elements of this neighborhood? If we're going to build a neighborhood that's reflective of the communities that Scott John Biggers was talking about in his paintings, what were those key elements? Well, I started to study his work and talk to him about it, and when he basically left me with something that had a profound impact on me, and it kind of guides my work continuously in terms of doing neighborhood work, is that, he kind of said there were like 5 important areas of developing neighborhoods, of good neighborhoods. And the first one was that there was good and relevant architecture. The second one, that there is some sense of art, creativity, and culture. Third, that that education is an important factor in healthy neighborhoods. Fourth, that there's a sense of a social safety net. And then the fifth, as some kind of economic generation in the process. So we started out initially with the arts part because that was, well, the architecture we had already started to take care of once we did the renovation. And then we brought artists in to start doing art projects and sharing their work with folks within the community. And it's been interesting over the years how early on a lot of the projects, such as this one, which was Whitfield Lavelle, was focusing on the house and reflecting on the community. But as artists have continued now, a lot of it is kind of focused on how you bring those community people together with some of these new people that are moving to our neighborhood, which I'll talk about that in a little bit. But this is a piece that was done after Katrina as a way of creating a platform for people from New Orleans because we had a lot of evacuees in Houston from New Orleans, and these artists wanted to create a platform through which they could communicate some of their issues. But, so we were able to, clean up this site, kind of fix the buildings up a little bit so we can start looking at the architecture and the language of the architecture and how it really functions within a community with these little porches, stoops that sit, next to the sidewalk, so it's easy that people kind of come together and have a conversation on the main side of the street, but on the back courtyard area, it's much more of a kind of private location. But we've been able to use this site in a number of ways, engaging the creativity of artists that we bring in, kind of exposing the possibilities, but also drawing upon the creativity of people that are already within the neighborhood. And so over the years, this project has expanded from the original block and a half of 22 little houses to about 6 blocks of property. A lot of it is open space property that we're building on now. Over time, a lot of this is open space, but we're beginning to build on it now. And so they're from 22 houses to some 30-something houses now. Additional houses on top of the 22. Some six small commercial buildings, and it's continuing to go. But in this open space, part of the strategy is that we just use it. Everything becomes part of the park. It's a sculpture park that is continuing along until other resources become available to do different things. If you can see the houses in the background, the ones on the right-hand side are historic houses that we moved to the location, and then the one that's right in the center that's kind of facing forward is a house that we designed and built. And but what's also been interesting though is how we've been trying to balance out, how we bring the aesthetics and the understanding of creativity from the outside. We also we try to bridge that with what's happening inside. And inside, there are quite a few of these kind of folk artist people, and so we've tried to create opportunities for them to explore their work. And this is one of a guy that's called the Flower Man, and so he does a lot of yard art. But even looking at his work and seeing how it impacts other houses within the area, so there's this kind of branching out of even other people that have found something in his work that's adding to the language of what's happening in our neighborhood. And but once you kind of start this kind of stuff, it's most people know that a lot of people would say that art is in the beginning process of gentrification. Well, we started out in a neighborhood and in an area where it was devalued, and people thought, well, there's not a lot of value in this neighborhood, and we were trying to get people to come to the neighborhood. That was a big issue and a big effort to get people to even come to this neighborhood. And but now, everybody wants to be in the neighborhood, and real estate values have just gone crazy. So you have these situations where the little houses in the front are traditionally what you would find in this neighborhood, and then all around it, these larger townhouses, which has forced us to move into a broader thinking about what we were doing instead of allowing ourselves to stop with that block and a half site, looking more at the broader neighborhood, which we own about 6 blocks in this area, but also looking at how we partner with other institutions to actually push back against that development. And so part of that is, our continuing to design and build houses that kind of fit the context of the neighborhood. And this is just an example of the house. And there's a lot of partnerships that go into this kind of stuff. Like that was said, these are houses that were designed with, we have a partnership with Rice University, in which they developed what they call the building workshop program, in which they design and build. But we've been working with them mostly on design work in terms of creating housing that that reflects what's happening in our area. But the other thing is also being playing the role of organizing, which is changing the consciousness of people about the neighborhood. I don't know if you can see them all across the country. At first I thought that they were only in Houston, where you see these signs, billboards that say, we bought ugly houses. And so the idea, it's this psychological thing, it's just kind of having people think that their houses have no value. And so this is a campaign that was put together to kind of restore people's understanding of the value of the neighborhood. And this is a man that kind of carried carried it almost in an individual protesting way, in which he would carry the sign through as he was walking. And we asked him one day, why are you doing this? And he said, well, I walk every day for exercise, and I'm proud of my neighborhood, so I want to carry one of these signs. So one of the artists is kind of like, who's one of my mentor artists, who's a very good craftsman. He had everybody take off their belts, and he cut it all up and made a harness so the guy could wear it on both sides without having to carry it. And so seeing people kind of buy into the language that we're trying to generate for the neighborhood becomes significant. So this is actually on the right-hand side is a little small commercial building, but the buildings in the middle back there, houses that we just finished constructing this year, and the building with an awning on it over there is one that we have under contract. But so we've been continuing to add more and more houses into this location. But the challenging thing for us though is, as we expand, the houses like this, by the end of this year, we would have built an additional 56 units of houses. So when you go from, a project with 22 houses, where, 10 of the houses are used for these kind of arts programming, you have education program that is arts-centered, there's a transitional housing program for single mothers. But the arts part and the culture part is a dominant part of that original program. But now, as you start 56 houses among the ones that we've already done, it becomes kind of a little balanced. So we're trying to figure out how do we continue to infuse some kind of creative thinking and artistic practice in the growth of the scale. So, part of it is like, for instance, there's an artist who's developing the ritual that we bring people into the community and the way that they leave the community. So there's these move-in gift bags that people can get as they come in. And also, though, looking at, this is a bad slide, but there's an artist that worked on the lighting of the site, how that happens. Now I'm gonna finish with something else though that I've been doing that because Project Row Houses is ongoing. There's a huge web of collaborations and things, and I'm like a little part of it. And I'm always trying to figure out where I fit and how to move within that process. And also, some of the other projects they've been larger projects that it's kind of hard to get my hands around it. Particularly now I've been working on a project in New Orleans called Transformer Project that's even more scattered. So I've had this desire to kind of figure out how I can get my hands around, do a project that interests me, but I can get a little bit more control over it. And one of the things I started doing was looking at people within the Third Ward neighborhood. Just as we saw Project Warehouses and said this is an asset that is not being taken advantage of, and we've been able to work it and turn it into something that really is an asset to the neighborhood. Start looking at these individuals around the neighborhood who who basically, they have a lot to offer, but just the conditions of life has kind of pushed them outside of being real contributors. And so there are four of them that I'm working on. This guy, his name is Eugene Howard, but he called himself brother-in-law. And I met him, I guess around 2000, he got out of prison. He had been in prison for 20-something years, and but before that, he had this little cafe and all this stuff, and he just has this wonderful smile and this wonderful energy, and he loves cooking, and he's always bringing his barbecue. He just comes by the office, bring barbecue and that kind of stuff, and but nobody really understood the value of that as an asset. So I started this process with him of marketing him, brother-in-laws, as this person that does these little catering things for the neighborhood. So whenever our neighborhood council meets, brother-in-laws, provide the food, and different kinds of things, sometimes board meetings and those kinds of things. So already he's beginning to get this identity as someone who provides a service within the neighborhood. And another thing that he does also, most of these people, they have multiple gifts kind of that they put out into the world. And another one of his is that he's very attentive to me as being someone that he feels is significant to the neighborhood, and he wants to support me any way he can. So he's like my right-hand man, And so one day I was rushing to the airport, didn't have enough time to do my usual parking and stuff, and so he said, "I'll drive you," and I said, "Okay." He didn't have a car, so he drove me to the airport. And I said, on the way, "Well, just keep my car, you can drive it, while I'm gone." And then all of a sudden that evolved into this thing that now he's my driver. So I have a driver. I get ready to go to the airport, I call him up and say, "You ready?" I call him before I come back. I need to go downtown and I don't want to pay parking and stuff. He comes up, drives me, and so there's this kind of multiple thing about brother-in-laws, and I'd say that every neighborhood, it's one of those kind of things that. And then this is another person who is, his name is Kenya Shabazz, and he's kind of a one-person Black Panther movement in our neighborhood that most people kind of find him a little bit, they don't really understand what he's doing. But, I'll watch him and I see how between the hours of like 2:30 and 4 o'clock, there's a neighborhood store that's a real tough place. And he's there on site, watching, making sure these kids are okay, and they're getting through and all that stuff. And he also rides his bike through the neighborhood as kind of his own little, he's his own little security guy. And so he, I start taking pictures of him, and so then I start putting these banners up of him around the neighborhood. And all of a sudden it was interesting how the neighborhood responded differently to him, and then he responded differently. It was kind of like, all of a sudden he had a certain kind of, he had some meaning and some authority to be who he really wants to be, and it just kind of elevated his effectiveness throughout. And his other things, he plays music out in front of one of the little storefronts there, and he's a neighborhood DJ. So they're like these people that kind of play these real interesting roles that I'm interested in trying to figure out how to elevate what they mean and their significance for the community. This is the final one that I'll show. I don't have the fourth one. But this is a guy who lives in the neighborhood. He's a weekend docent at Project Row Houses, but he plays the saxophone all the time. And what he started, I just kind of picked up on this, that he started at a certain point, lots of houses were burning in our neighborhood. And that's generally what happens when gentrification is coming, when people have real estate. It's better to have vacant land. So houses just burn, they get torn down, because you can't argue for any kind of historic preservation once the house has been burned. So, and this guy would go and he would just play these, kind of almost like a requiem for the demise of these houses, and he does it continuously. I think we recorded him doing, I think last year there were like 23 performances that he did throughout. And so, just kind of keeping track and record of those kinds of things as a way of highlighting what he does as a contribution to the overall